Hello and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. What a great lineup today. Second hour, Jimmy Akin will be here. First hour, he's back. Trent Horn here with us, the proprietor of the Council of Trent podcast and one of the most prolific, famous, productive, helpful Catholics on the internet. And you know what we're going to do with him? It'll be tips for defending the faith. He's been doing it for a long time. He's been defending the faith. If you've got a question about how to defend the faith, 888-318-7884 is the number. You want to defend God, the idea of God. You want to defend the person of Jesus, his divinity, his moral teaching. You want to defend the Bible, the church. You want some help with these questions that modern people have about Christianity. You are welcome to call 888-318-7884. Trent Horn, welcome.
Well, thank you for having me, Cy. It's funny, excuse me, you're describing me like I'm prolific and productive. So what are we going to do? We're just going to set him to work.
Yeah, put him back to work.
Keep going.
That's what he does.
Back on that treadmill.
We might as well exploit his problems with workaholism, and he's here to do it again. 888-318-7884. All I ever hear, they gave out numbers at the staff meeting on Wednesday about like how the podcasts are doing, how the radio show's doing, how the internet stuff is doing. And all I hear is these big fat Trent Horn numbers. Like I think one of the numbers was 5 million. I don't even know what that number was about, but I was like, I never even heard a number 5 million before. What are you doing?
Were they also talking about the annual bonus, Cy, around that time?
No, they didn't mention. Were you expecting a $5 million bonus? Is that what you're?
I'm just asking you, is it possible that's where the number was floating around?
Okay. I think it was like people that visited you on your website in a month or so. I'm not good at the internet. I don't know what it was, but it was a big, fat, healthy number.
I don't know if it could be 5 million. I thought there was only like 200 people on the internet. Those are the same people I see on like X posts because I don't really follow anybody on X. I follow the Pope and Catholic Answers, and that's it. So I don't. Those are the only two things that I.
Well, I'll tell you what, before we go to calls, then, I want, and I don't mean to put you in the middle of a controversy or anything, asking you a Pope Francis question and all that, but I sincerely want to ask.
I don't mean to put you in the middle of something, but I believe it's pronounced controversy.
Oh, I beg your pardon. And again, I know there's people have strong feelings this way or that about the Pope, but you follow him on X. You follow Catholic Answers on X. Who's better on X, Catholic Answers or Pope Francis?
Who's better at what? I think would be the question.
At putting words on there. What else do you do on there? You put tweets on there. Who's better at tweeting, at Xing? What do you say now, tweeting or Xing? Tweeting. I'm going to say tweeting.
I would say...
You better not say the Pope. Go ahead.
I am not going to say the Pope. I think the Pope is better at presiding and leading a universal church, and I'm glad that he models that on social media platforms, or somebody else does that on his behalf, I would suspect.
No, I think he gets up and does it with his own thumbs every morning.
He's got his little phone and everything. I would think that he has somebody. I saw a video of Trump, how he does social media. He just like calls out something and he has an assistant that types it in. And he's like, I like it. Yeah, I think that's what he does. I saw the behind the scenes. So,
I want to get to that level where you just shout things out and people tweet them for you. How do you get to that level?
I don't know. I would think that if President-elect Trump does that, I would hope that Pope Francis has a designated tweet person that follows him around.
What possible similarity can you find between these two? What possible similarity? I don't think the Pope even speaks Italian.
I would just say divine.
Trump.
It's between the two of them. Divine providence works in mysterious ways.
Yeah, there you go. All right, so I'm gathering you're saying that the Pope has very nice tweets, but we at Catholic Answers are better at tweeting.
Well, I would say our social media. What is his title? Captain, Commandant, social media engineer.
I think it's Commissar. I think it's
Commissar.
Commissar. Yeah.
Thomas Graff. I think he's really since his tenure at Catholic Answers has really exploded our ability to reach people, because
he's good. He's good.
He understands the kids. And I have not. You know what's sad? So I took my kids to see Inside Out 2. A lot of fun. Not as good as the original, but it's still fun. And there's a joke in there where a song gets stuck in a character's head, And they're saying, we got to get this song or replace it with another song. Do we have any? And they say, no, all we have are commercial jingles and all of Dad's yacht rock. And I'm like, I like yacht rock.
You do like
I'm the
that,
dad.
right? Yeah.
I am the dad now in animated films. I am not the young protagonist. Look what I have become. And so
I think it's weird that you like yacht. I like like Christopher Cross. Like
that is,
how
it's
can,
not. Sai, it is not weird that I like yacht rock.
It
It
is
is
weird.
weird that I go to yacht rock tribute bands. That is weird.
Let's take some calls. Michael's in Buffalo, New York, watching on YouTube. Michael, thank you for the call. Go ahead with your question for Trent.
Hello, Trent. Thank you very much for taking my call. I have a question about baptism. And first, I have a simple one, then maybe a one on how to defend it. First, I was wondering if Jesus actually baptized himself. And the second question I have is, how as Catholics do we defend infant baptism? Because I was speaking to some Protestant acquaintances this week, and they were adamant that infant baptism is nowhere in the Bible.
Sure. Well, first, I would say that Jesus did not baptize himself. What's recorded in the Gospels is that he submitted to baptism by John the Baptist. Jesus had no need to be baptized, of course, because he's completely free from sin. But he did that to fulfill all righteousness. So he did that. Oh, go ahead.
I meant that he baptized others.
Oh, did he himself baptize others? Yes, got it.
I see. Did Jesus baptize? Right. I think there's references to Jesus baptizing in the Gospel of John, but then John clarifies the matter in another verse that it was others who were baptizing on Jesus's behalf, and that Jesus was not personally baptizing anyone. So it can be referred, Jesus baptizing people. Well, it's the apostles, it's the disciples who are baptizing on Jesus' behalf. I don't have the verses right on. It said, let's see. I believe it's in like John 3 and John 4. But no, I don't believe there's evidence that Jesus personally baptized people. But on to your next question about the necessity of infant baptism. So they were saying no infant baptism. What was their general argument?
Refer to Acts when Peter went to visit the centurion and baptized the families. And they were saying, well, nowhere says infants specifically. And I was trying to make the point that families would include children.
Yeah. Well, what I would say there is that that's an argument from silence. That's a very weak form of argument. In fact, if you go to the Jimmy Akin podcast, go to Jimmy Akin's channel. He has a new podcast now with Catholic Answers. And he did an episode recently on arguments from silence, and that they are notoriously weak. Just because something isn't mentioned, it doesn't follow that it's not important. The book of Acts, for example, does not record anyone using the proper and correct baptismal formula. I baptize you in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. So no one is recorded using that formula as they baptize someone. It's just recorded as the instruction that Jesus gives in Matthew 28. So if they're making the argument from silence, someone could say, oh, you should just, and some Christians do argue this way. They say you should baptize in the name of Jesus, and that's it, because that's how it was done in Acts. But that's, once again, that's just an argument from silence. Just because infants are not shown to be baptized, it doesn't follow that they weren't baptized. So I think here you just say that's just an argument from silence, and you should ask the person, what is baptism for? And they'll probably say, well, baptism is a sign that you have saving faith. And you can say, where does the Bible say that is what baptism is for? So which you should really do. A lot of times when people will say, oh, show me this in the Bible, they're putting you on the defensive when you should put them on the defensive to say, why does everything we have to believe have to be found in the Bible? And you can point out there are many Protestants who believe in infant baptism, both baptism that saves, like Lutherans believe that, Anglicans believe that. And then there are Protestants who believe in infant baptism that does not save. It's the sign of, joining the new covenant, the covenant community. So I would recommend there, just ask them, what is baptism for? If they give you the stand, it sounds like they're the kind of Protestant who would say it's just a sign to show others you have been saved already by faith. You can ask, where does the Bible say that is what baptism is for? Show me. Because a lot of times in these dialogues, it's, if the Catholic can't prove baptism regenerates and saves us, then the Protestant wins. And that's not true. And once again, not all Protestants believe that. But you can say, look, you're making a claim that baptism is just a sign that we have been saved already. Where does the Bible say that? Instead, every instance where baptism is brought up, it is something that Protestants who deny baptismal regeneration have to explain away. In 1 Peter 3:21, baptism saves you now. Well, it doesn't really save you. John 3:5, you have to be born of water and the Spirit to enter the kingdom of heaven. Well, that's referring to natural birth, this or that. So I would recommend, just checking. Sorry, that should be a helpful path for you. Resources I would recommend on this. My book, Case for Catholicism, has a lot on the issue of baptism in it. I can always get you a copy of that. If you just stay on the line, I'll email you a copy. And I did an episode of my show recently with a Church of Christ minister who has an interesting view on this. He believes Church of Christ believes that baptism saves, but you still shouldn't baptize infants. So we had a really interesting dialogue with one another. You can check that out on my channel. But if you stay on the line, I'll send you a copy of Case for Catholicism.
Thanks, Michael. Got to take a quick break. Trent Horn this hour. Tips for defending the faith. All lines full right now, but they'll open up. 888-318-7884.
We're here for you. Call now. Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Magnificat. Published monthly, Magnificat features texts of daily Mass, prayers, articles, meditations, art commentaries, and more, in step with the liturgical rhythm of the Church, on the web at magnificat.com.
I'm Jeanette DeMello, Editor-in-Chief of the National Catholic Register, and together with Matthew Bunson, I co-host Register Radio, where every week we talk to the Register's writers and editors about the news you need to know and offer authentic Catholic insight on the important stories that impact your life. Join us for Register Radio, Saturday at 4 p.m. Eastern and Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern, here on EWTN Global Catholic Radio.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Trent Horn with us this hour. And if you'd like some tips for how to defend this or that aspect of the faith, you are welcome to call 888-318-7884. Going down to Tennessee now. Andrew's in Tennessee watching on YouTube. Andrew, thank you for waiting. Go ahead with your question for Trent.
Hello, Trent Horn. How are you doing this evening?
I am doing well.
All right. Good to hear. So anyway, I'll get to my question. So I've heard rumors that for centuries, the Catholic Church was known for banning and destroying certain books. I haven't looked into these rumors very much myself, but I know one book that critics of Catholicism will claim was banned and destroyed en masse was known as the Lesser Key of Solomon, and that one contained the Ars Goetia. From what I hear about it, it's some kind of grimoire on demonology. So basically, what I ask you is, could you please provide clarification on both the rumor that the Catholic Church banned and destroyed particular, as well as what exactly the Lesser Key of Solomon is? Thank you very much.
Sure. I am not familiar with the Lesser Key of Solomon, so I can't give you much on that. According to this article, it appears to be a book compiled of other writings that are probably centuries older, compiled in the mid-17th century, dealing with sorcery, mysticism, magic, occult. So it seems to be some kind of a early modern, 15th, 16th century, 17th century, early modern magical, mystical, occult text of some kind. Otherwise, I don't know much more about the Lesser Key of Solomon. I do know that the church did publish a prohibited index of books for the purpose of protecting the faithful, to say that the church's duty is to safeguard souls and to lead them to heaven. And if there are materials that could be dangerous to souls, especially the souls of lay people who are not equipped to counter the errors that they find in these works, the church has an obligation to protect people from these things. So in the 16th century, I think it was under Pope Paul not Pope Paul VI. It would have been, let's see, do I have the note here? Pope Paul the Fourth. I switched the Roman numerals in my mind. It definitely wasn't Pope Paul VI. Under Pope Paul IV, there was an index that was put forward. This was referred to as the Index Laborum Prohibitorum, so the index of banned or prohibited books, and different books were added on there. Now, the enforcement mechanisms to say you have a moral obligation not to consume this literature. This being a legal obligation, it was adopted. It could only be legally enforced in the papal states. Or in certain Catholic countries where the civil power agreed with the church and proceeded to ban those works. So in the late Middle Ages and the early modern period, both Catholic and Protestant countries engaged in censorship of a wide variety of materials. It's not something that's unique to Catholicism. So this kind of censorship, this went on. Different books were added. Some books were actually taken off of the list when the author would make revisions or defend their work before the magisterium. Then in 1966, the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith said that while there's not any continuing legal obligations under there's no ecclesiastical law barring people from reading these books, there is a continuing moral obligation insofar as one should not read these books if they have a disposition that could easily lead to doubt or abandoning the truth, so to speak. The church, though, has said that there are so many new pieces of heretical literature, dangerous literature that come out all the time. The church just simply couldn't keep up with that today to have a kind of a list related to that. But different local bishops' conferences will often censure works. I know Father Richard McRyan's book on Catholicism was censored a while ago by the USCCB. I have an episode on feminist theology on my podcast where I talk about the dangers of feminist theology and how some of those works were condemned by the USCCB, and like feminist professors at Boston College, things like that. So it just exists to say, look, you should just be careful. I'm a big fan. There's a novelty stamp you can buy that says heretical, like treat as garbage, only to be used for research purposes, like to stamp into books. So I'd love to do that with my own personal library at some point. So I'll just stop there. Is that at least a helpful summary to give you get your head around the issue?
Yeah, I'd say so. Thank you very much, Trent Horn.
Okay, great.
All right, Andrew, thank you very much. We've got time, so we'll head off to Omaha, Nebraska now. Tom is listening on KVSS, that's Spirit Catholic Radio in Omaha. Tom, thanks for the call. Go ahead with the question.
Okay, my question is this. What's your opinion, or what do you think about this, that the fathers of children who are about to be aborted should have the right to veto that abortion? Because it is their body too, and even in some cases here in Nebraska, for example, a woman can abort her baby when she's married to the father and doesn't even have to tell him.
Right.
So anyway, what do you have to say about that? What do you think about that?
I think that ideally it should be illegal to kill children in the womb. So that's the ideal. And in some places we do have that ideal now that Roe versus Wade has been overturned. Surgical abortions are illegal here in the state of Texas, where I live, for example. But that's the ideal. But in places where you can't achieve the ideal politically, if you can achieve what's less than ideal but still advances the good, that's something that can be justified. Pope St. John Paul II said that laws that permit abortion can be justified. A legislator can be justified in enacting those laws if what he's trying to do is restrict abortion. So he can't increase legal abortion, but if he can't completely get rid of it, he could at least try to decrease it as much as possible, like banning as much as he can that the social order will allow. In some cases, he might try to ban all abortions, and that just won't go through. He'll lose his political seat, and then bad stuff will continue even more. So the law you're describing, there have been laws like that before. I think there was one in Pennsylvania. So in 1992, you have Roe versus Wade, and there was a big challenge to Roe versus Wade because Roe said, legal abortion up to the first trimester, restrict for a woman's health in the second trimester, ban it in the third trimester unless a woman's life or health is in danger. But then there were other laws like parental consent laws saying, parents can say, I'm not going to allow my daughter to get an abortion. And there were laws saying that husbands could prohibit their wives from getting abortions. So in Planned Parenthood versus Casey, it's back when Governor Bob Casey probably was the governor of Pennsylvania. Planned Parenthood sued Pennsylvania's laws. I think one of the laws was protecting at least a husband's rights over his unborn child. And the court came back and said, it got rid of Roe's trimester system and said, look, viability is the standard. After viability, you can ban abortion, but you have to leave a health exception. Before viability, you can restrict abortion as long as it doesn't place an undue burden on a woman. So the court said that parental consent laws do not place an undue burden, but they said that laws requiring the consent of a husband or the father of the child do place an undue burden. Of course, now all that's gone. Roe and Casey have been overturned, and because it's been overturned, in theory, you could pass one of those laws. I think it'd be difficult to pass the law for just saying the father, because it'd be difficult in many of these cases. I think 83% of abortions are obtained by unmarried women. Proving paternity itself is going to be, a difficult issue there. In marriage, paternity is presumed. So there is just a presumption the husband is the father unless the husband challenges it. So you have an easier time having a law saying that husbands can veto their wives' decisions to get abortions. But yeah, if they could pass a law like that, if it at least saves some children, I would be in favor of that. It is absolutely tragic. I used to do some work with a group called Fatherhood Forever Foundation, and they're a group of men who are post-abortive in the sense that they fathered children, wanted to raise those children, and the women they impregnated chose abortion. And it's absolutely devastating. So definitely we pray for women who are post-abortive, but we oftentimes forget about men who are post-abortive as well. But Tom, is that helpful answer to your question?
Yeah, that's real good. I was thinking also there's the factor of gender disquality or lack of equality gender-wise. There's also that element that men and women have to be treated the same in jobs and in housing and every other thing. And that'd be a good way to get at this particular question. But your answer is excellent.
Thank you. Yeah. What's interesting there is there are people who argue for the gender equality. What's funny is that the people who defend legal abortion don't see the double standard in that. So there are individuals who argue for male abortions, not like transgender stuff, but the idea that if a woman can say, I don't want to be a mom anymore, a father should be able to sign a paper that says, I don't want to be a dad anymore. I'm not paying child support. They call it a male abortion. And many pro-abortion people say, no, that's unjust. A woman should be able to have that support. The mother should have that support. Barack Obama, obviously, like he once said, fatherhood begins at conception. So the double standard is quite frank there, that they'll say, no, fathers cannot get out of their responsibility to children by just by saying, no, I'm done. They can't just walk away. They have to support this child and the mother. Yet women are allowed to walk away with fatal consequences for the child. So if you want gender equality, now they might say, fine, male abortions. That's not what I want. I want equality in the sense that we hold men accountable for raising their unborn children, and we hold women accountable for their children, born or unborn. Thank you for calling in.
Thanks, Tom. Trent Horn is our guest. Our number is 888-318-7884, and you can get any kind of tip you'd like for defending the faith. Trent started out defending life, as a matter of fact, as an apologist for the pro-life position, and expanded that into being a Catholic apologist, and covers all of that in his many books. So if you've got questions about how to do it, as Tom just did with the pro-life question, or if it has something having to do with the faith. Trent wrote a book called Persuasive Pro-Life, certainly, but I'm thinking of the Answering Atheism. That's yours, right? Answering Atheism? Do I have the right title?
Bet.
Yeah. Okay. I wanted to make sure that I had the right title. For some reason, I thought I might have messed that up. So if you want to defend the person of God, you want to defend the divinity of Jesus, you want to defend the truth of the sacraments and the Catholic faith, whatever it is, 888-318-7884, 888-31-TRUTH. The music tells you we're going to take a very quick break, and then we'll be back. Check out our big giant sale. Lots of stuff on sale over at shop.catholic.com. So much that I can't even read it all to you. Just check it out, shop.catholic.com. What was the church like in its infancy? In a word, Catholic. And Joe Heschmeyer has the receipts. In his best-selling book, The Early Church Was the Catholic Church, he gives you the details from the historical records of the first 2 centuries of Christianity. Right now, get a copy for just $10, plus free shipping if you live in the continental United States. Get more information and order The Early Church Was the Catholic Church at theearlychurchwascatholic.com.
Is orthodoxy an alternative to the Catholic Church? In a time of uncertainty for many Catholics, orthodoxy can look like greener pastures. Answering Orthodoxy, the new book from Catholic Answers Press, explains why Catholics who are thinking of leaving need to think twice. There are important reasons to remain in the Catholic Church and convincing answers to Orthodox claims. Order your copy of Answering Orthodoxy today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Is the Catholic faith still a rock amidst the waves of history? Why does it so often seem to be a mess? In his latest book, Confusion in the Kingdom, best-selling author Trent Horn helps you to get to the roots of the present chaos, explaining the destabilizing movements within Catholicism and exposing the harm and scandal progressive Catholicism has caused. Order your copy of Confusion in the Kingdom today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore.
Our Lord needs articulate defenders of the truth to spread the joy of the Catholic faith. Catholic Answers monthly giving club, Society 315, helps you fulfill the call in 1 Peter 3:15 to always be prepared to make a defense for the hope that is in you. For as little as $10 a month, you'll help Catholics grow in faith, bring lapsed Catholics home, and lead non-Catholics to the truth. Go to casociety315.com and join today.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I don't think I have to explain the TikTok thing every time. TikTok is a thing. Thomas handles TikTok for us here. We call him Thomas the TikTok Engine when he comes in. He asks a question of the apologist, and he takes it back to TikTok to teach the entire earth the truth. So go ahead, Thomas the TikTok Engine.
So I have no idea what you're talking about.
I like your Santa hat. I didn't even comment on that.
Thank you.
Santa hat.
Yeah, I know. Some people might think it's a little premature, but I feel like, Advent is a season of preparation, but you can prepare for that by reminding everyone, hey, guess what's coming?
Well, the other thing about a Santa hat, it's just a cool hat.
It's just a cool hat.
It's not a religious object.
Everyone should wear one.
All right. Go ahead, Thomas the TikTok Engine.
All right, Trent. This one seems like pretty much a softball for you. This was on one of the TikToks I posted earlier where you responded to an abortion objection. And someone said, according to science, a fetus is not alive until it gets a heartbeat, which means comparing it to a live grown human is wrong.
According to what science? If something is growing by cellular reproduction, then it's alive. There are many things that are alive that do not have heartbeats, bacteria, plants, for example. So clearly the unborn are alive because they're growing by cellular reproduction. If you consult scientific textbooks like Ronan O'Reilly and Fabiola Mueller's Human Embryology and Teratology, it says that after fertilization, a new genetically distinct human organism is formed. So not only are the unborn from fertilization alive because they're growing by cellular reproduction, they are human because they have human DNA, and they are a whole organism. And since they are a whole human organism, just a smaller one, They're like you or I, and so they ought to be protected under the law.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Trent, but you cited a textbook, and this person cited science. So I think they might have beat you there, actually.
I think a science textbook beats a vague allusion to science any day of the week.
Okay.
I don't know how science would feel about that.
I don't know how TikTok would
We'll
feel
have to
about
check
that.
science's feelings. Thank you, Thomas, the festive TikTok engine.
Thank you, Cy and Trent.
All right, back to the phones we go. Levi's in Virginia watching on YouTube. Levi, thank you for your call. Go ahead with your question.
Thanks for taking my call. Peace be with you.
And with your spirit.
And also, I hope you all have a very blessed Advent. I don't know the terminology you would use there.
I think that was it.
Yeah.
I think you just did. But
Blessed
yesterday,
Advent?
after you said these nice things, you said, now with that out of the way, or how did he say it? Now with the
I will mea culpa.
all right, all right.
I unfortunately called blessing others with the peace that Jesus gave to the apostles a formality.
Oh yeah,
So,
now that the formalities are out of the way, you said. So this wasn't just a formality. You really are giving us an Advent blessing.
Yes.
All right.
Mea culpa.
All right. You may go ahead with your question then.
All right. Thank you, Cy Kellett.
You're welcome, Levi.
All right. Trent, first of all, I just want to say, big fan of your work, and I really appreciate all the things it's done. It's been very helpful for me in looking into the claims of the Catholic Church, but also I really appreciate, I was raised in a Baptist family. My mother was, my family's pretty pro-life, so I really appreciate the work that you do on that front. It's
Thank you.
It's a blessing.
Thank you very much.
The Council of Trent is also a blessing. You guys can watch it, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts.
I appreciate that. All right. Well, how can I be of help?
All right. One of the key beliefs in Catholic teaching, Catholic theology, whatever you want to call it, Catholic belief is the fact that we are given free wills. And that means that we can choose good and we can choose wrong. And God respects our free will. Here's my question. Since God, being omniscient, has known this from before he laid the foundations of the earth, before he created the earth, why does he still respect our free wills when he knows and has known from all eternity that we often choose things that aren't good for us, that, just reject him and all the good things he wants for us?
All right. Trent, why?
Right. I think the simplest answer is that he loves us. God loves us, and so he has some choices to make. God creates the world, and because he's all-knowing, he knows what we'll do before we do it. He knows who we are. Even before we come into existence, he knows us. That doesn't mean we pre-existed our own conception or anything like that. It just means that God, in his infinite wisdom and knowledge, knows everything about us, and he loves us, and he chose to create a world where we would come into existence. That you're correct. I mean, God doesn't want us to sin. God hates evil, and God could have prevented us from using our free wills to sin by simply not creating us in the first place. He could have just not created the world, and it just could have been perfection, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. It just could have been that. But there are some great goods that are lost in that option. The good of people like you or me spending all eternity in the presence of God and feeling the love of God and being in communion with him and beholding God. So there's a lot of good things that are lost to choosing an option like that. And God loves us and wants to give us that free choice. Or he could have created us, and you're right, he could have mangled with our wills enough so that we always choose him. But because God loves us, he doesn't want to make us like Stepford Wives, like that. I think it was a book that was adapted into a film. It was, the husbands get together and make the robot wives that are perfect for them. And it's all very creepy. It'd be very creepy if God did that to us. He loves us as children, And so he gives us an opportunity to choose him. And part of that love involves the opportunity to not choose him. So it is a bit of a mystery why God would allow some people to fully reject him. But I think that part of it does relate to God loving us and allowing us to have that free decision. And just because some people reject God, that shouldn't be a veto on other people being able to freely choose him. And of course that God, all these evil things happen, but God is able to bring more good from any evil that he tolerates, because he's all knowing and all powerful. No matter what evil occurs that we human beings do, God can always bring a greater good from that. So I hope this is helpful for you. If you go to our website at shop.catholic.com, we have a wonderful DVD video from my friend and colleague Jimmy Akin on the problem of evil that might be helpful for you. But thanks for calling in, Levi. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Levi. Off to New York we go now, where Michael is listening to EWTN on Channel 130, Sirius XM satellite radio. Michael, welcome. Go ahead with your question for Trent.
Hello. Thank you for taking my call, and thank you for your work on apologetics. My question is this. I recently looked into purchasing a rosary online, and I saw this one site of the store that's focused in Rome, and they sell these rosaries that have second-class relics of Padre Pio, and they're blessed by the Pope. And I looked into the store on site, and they seem to be a credible store, but you see these things online where they talk about how that might be considered simony, or, unless it's blessed after you purchase it, it shouldn't be something they do. Other people say it's okay. I wasn't exactly sure what the Catholic position is on it, so I wanted to know what your thoughts are on purchasing things like rosaries that have already been blessed by somebody like the Pope.
Yeah, I think that it would only constitute simony, named after Simon the magician, who wanted to buy spiritual gifts from Peter. So the sin of simony is when you try to obtain spiritual gifts or spiritual offices with money. So if somebody tries to, bribe the Pope to be a bishop of such and such place, that'll be the sin of simony. So it's trying to buy and sell spiritual goods. And in this case, though, in the case of selling religious devotional items, it would only be simony if you were buying it to try to receive the blessing. But you can't receive a blessing in that way by buying an object that had been previously blessed. But it's not forbidden to sell an object that has been blessed. I mean, most Catholics have their home blessed by a priest, and then they go and they list their home. But, as long as somebody's not buying your house, it's like, oh, I heard Father so-and-so blessed it, I got to have it. It's clearly it's not simony. So, yeah, I would say there that it's, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that in terms of the idea that they're actually advertising it based upon it's blessed, and obviously they got a second-class relic, is that something that because of that the price may be more, so they're charging more? I just wanted to make sure it's okay and it's legitimate, because I've heard different things where you really shouldn't purchase something that's blessed. You should get it blessed after you purchase it. But as long as the Catholic position is that it's okay to do that, then I'm fine with that. I just was unsure, because you hear different things online about that, about people saying different things, and I figured you as an apologist might give the best answer.
Yeah, I'm not aware of a specific prohibition in canon law or in other ecclesial laws that prohibit this. I think this falls into an area where it ought to be avoided to advertise that an object that is for religious devotion happens to also have been blessed. I think it falls in the area where if you were to buy it, it's not sinful to do that, as long as you're not operating under the mistaken idea of trying to buy a spiritual good attached to it. But I think it falls under the purview of something that probably should be avoided, even if it is allowed, because there's that potential for scandal and confusion that's involved. But if you were to buy it and have the right sense in your head and heart of why you're doing it, it's not a problem.
Michael, I got to leave it there because I got to head to the.
Sure.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah, I was going to say, no problem. Thank you. I think you answered my question. I appreciate it. Have a good night.
Thank you very much. Well, we'll take a break. We'll be right back with more tips for defending the faith with Trent Horn on Catholic Answers Live.
Hello, this is Archbishop Salvatore Cordileone of San Francisco. Keep your dial tuned to Catholic Answers Live.
In Morse code, the sequence SOS is a distress call. It's been said that it stands for Save Our Souls. Well, right now our world is in big trouble. and we're putting out an SOS call for help. Will you answer that call? St. Paul Street Evangelization, a Catholic nonprofit, has hundreds of teams who share the good news with souls who don't know Jesus. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization. Visit streetevangelization.com to get involved.
The most original Catholic content is on EWTN Radio.
Each week on the world over, we try to bring you perspectives you're not going to see anywhere else, even in Catholic media. And we also try to bring those cultural figures, world leaders, decision makers, to the audience in, I hope, vibrant way.
The World Over with Raymond Arroyo. Tonight, 8 Eastern on EWTN Radio and Television.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. Oh my gosh, the phones just stay lighted when Trent is here. It just looks like an Advent celebration on the phone board with all the lights blinking. We just talked to Michael in New York. Let's go to Idaho because Dave's up in Idaho watching on YouTube. Welcome, Dave. You got a question for Trent?
Hey, Trent. I'm wondering if faithful Catholics can be universalist, and if not, I'm wondering why are there so many great saints, such as Saint Gregory of Nyssa, who clearly held to universalism?
Sure. So it depends on what you mean by universalism. If you are talking about the claim that it has been divinely revealed that all creatures will eventually spend eternity in heaven, then I would say a Catholic cannot assent to universalism based on the magisterial teaching of the Church. It's certainly clear in the ordinary magisterium, where the Church ordinarily teaches. So you go to the Catechism, for example, in paragraph 1035, it says, the teaching of the Church affirms the existence of hell and its eternity. Immediately after death, the souls of those who die in a state of mortal sin descend into hell, where they suffer the punishments of hell, eternal fire. The chief punishment of hell is eternal separation from God. So that's what the Church teaches. I believe, there's elements of universalism that were condemned in early regional councils, though some people claim it wasn't universalism, it was just some of Origen's writings, so that's a little bit disputed there. But I think also a strong case can be made that the Church, this is something that has been infallibly defined in the Church's ordinary and universal magisterium, which doesn't require uniform testimony among early Christians. So you might have some that espouse universalism. I have not looked at Gregory of Nyssa in a while on this subject. I know there is a book on universalism by Michael McClymond. It's called The Devil's Redemption. It's a 2-volume monster of a book, very thick, very good also. The Devil's Redemption, A New History and Interpretation of Christian Universalism by Michael McClymond. And it really goes through and shows where a lot of people have exaggerated, especially among the Eastern Fathers, their adoption of universalism. So I would like to check McClymond on Nyssa and do more before I could comment on him specifically. But I would say there's a long tradition of affirming hell being a genuine possibility for creatures, not just being a genuine possibility, but it's being something that's definite, at least for demonic creatures, for the devil, for demons, because many universalists will say no creature will be in hell, not even the devil. So that's how I would look at that. I'm trying to think if there's anything else related to the topic. No, I think I'll just stop there. Yeah, is that helpful, or would you like more clarification? Or
I don't think he wants more clarification. He hung up. So, or I hung up on him. I should be careful what I say. Somehow, Dave is not there anymore.
Well, I hope that will suffice. But yeah, when it comes, sorry, now I know what I wanted to say. Mm-hmm. When it comes to universalism, there's another view, not saying that, well, every single creature will go to heaven. The other view would be hoping that somehow every human being will end up in heaven and receive God's grace. We don't know that's a guarantee, but to say, it's something to pray for. and maybe it's possible we could hope that that's how it ends up, and it would be great if that's how the story ends up. So that is something that the theologian Hans Urs von Balthasar argued for in his book, Dare We Hope. This has been called the Dare We Hope view. There have been other modern theologians, even bishops and others, who have defended this view. I have engaged the view a little bit on my podcast, and my assessment is that the Dare We Hope view is orthodox. It is not heretical to believe that the church does not, there's no reverse canonization process for hell. And we have prayers like the Fatima prayer. We pray that God will lead for Mary to lead all souls to heaven. All souls will be led to heaven. But so while it's not heretical, there's this possibility. Possibility does not entail probability. So I personally, when it comes to the Dare We Hope view, I don't like when people say we can have a reasonable hope all people will go to heaven, because the weight of the church's testimony and Jesus's words about the reality of hell for a great number of people and the spiritual battle we are in really seems to weigh against that optimism. So I would say that it's the weight of that tradition bears heavily, that the possibility is so very, very remote, it would be imprudent to try to build an eschatology around it. All I could say is you can't have a reasonable hope, you could have a rational hope. It's like if I said I bought a lotto ticket and you asked me, do I have a hope I'm going to win the lottery? Do I have a reasonable hope? 80 million to 1? Probably not. Can I have a rational hope? Yeah, I'm not crazy. There is a 1 in 80 million shot, but it's probably not going to happen. But, it's still out there. And if it did happen, that'd be amazing. And I think that's kind of how I look at the Dare We Hope view. I think the odds are even worse than 80 million to 1 for it to be true. But if it did happen, I would rejoice, because God desires the salvation of all people. And if I got to heaven and it turned out that was correct, I would rejoice with the angels for those who were lost have now been saved.
Dave, thanks very much for the call. I'm going to go to Mario now in Raleigh, North Carolina, watching on Twitch. Mario, go ahead with your question.
Hi, Trent. Thank you. My question is about defending the faith, specifically Marian dogmas. I'm a college student and often have several conversations with Protestant friends, and I want to make sure that I can articulate myself well. Specifically, I want to know about the pain and suffering not being present in heaven. I've heard that if Mary could hear our prayers, for example, she would be so devastated, and that just contradicts the idea that we have of heaven. And also, that's pretty much what I would like to have an answer to. And if I should be strong defending Mary or try to be a little bit more cautious when it comes to being like, oh, she's the queen of heaven, things like that. How to approach this with friends.
Okay, sure. So there's two elements there. When it comes to Mary being queen of heaven, you can just point to biblical types that in the Bible that the mother of the king is the queen, and that often she plays a major role in the affairs of the royal household, because the king could often have many wives. For example, like Solomon had 1,000 wives or 700 wives. 700 wives, 300 concubines. It's hard to keep track. Glad I'm not in that middle of that mess. So Bathsheba was Solomon's, was the queen mother, the Gebira in Hebrew, as she's called. So I would look at that there to say, saying Mary is queen of heaven, we're saying she's the mother of the king, and that Jesus honors her as his mother, and she is the most exalted of creatures because she bore and raised our Savior, Jesus Christ. He's the Theotokos, the God-bearer. And why, if Jesus honors his mother, why shouldn't we honor Jesus's mother as well? So I would look there when it comes to Queen of Heaven. When it comes to Mary hearing our prayers, the objection you raised was, well, Mary can't hear our prayers because if she did, she'd be saddened by them, and there's going to be no sadness in heaven. I would say, though, that the perfected souls and people who are in heaven, because Mary is body and soul in heaven, the people who have been perfected in righteousness who are in heaven, their souls are not disturbed at knowledge of evil. If their souls were disturbed at the knowledge of evil, then the objection, if your Protestant friend says this, to say, yeah, Mary can't hear our prayers because she'd be so sad hearing about them. You can ask him, well, what about when we get to heaven and we find out other people are not there and they're in hell? So the saints in heaven will be aware. They are aware of things that happen on earth, and they'll be aware of those who will go the way of the goats. But they will have a perfect understanding of God's justice. And so they will not experience despair or sadness at that. They will understand that everything, God's will is now finally at the final judgment. And after that, God's will is now finally done in heaven and in hell. And everything is placed under God's the enemies are under God's footstool, and God's will is now being perfectly done. At least in everything is as it should be. So I would look at it that way, that those who are in heaven have graces from God to allow them to assist us, to pray for us, and that what is troubling us is not going to trouble them. So is that a helpful start?
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, Trent. Thank you for taking the time to answer my question.
Oh, sure. No problem.
Thank you, Mario. Thanks very much. We got time for another one. Let's go to Jack in Raleigh, North Carolina, listening on the Divine Mercy Radio. Jack, go ahead with your question.
Hi. Thanks for taking my call, and thanks, Trent, for always being a resource for all of us and I know for me for 10 years. So really, really appreciate all your work. Recently, definitely the algorithm has found me in Orthodox YouTube, and a couple of arguments that I have found to be very intriguing or compelling from the Orthodox perspective was one that the Catholic Church allows the Filioque to be said in, or not to be said in Eastern Catholic parishes, showing an inconsistent in the Eastern Catholic churches. An inconsistency in what the Orthodox believe to be a very serious issue between the East and the West and the Filioque, and then also an inconsistency from Roman Catholics on the view of St. Gregory of Palamas, that at one point he was considered a heretic when he was with his divine energies, and then now he's able to have I can't remember what it's called, but the Sunday that they have in the Eastern Catholic parishes where it actually reveres St. Gregory of Palamas. So just want to see what your thoughts are, how you would rebuke those, or.
Well, I'm going to let him because we're short on time, Jack. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but if we only got a minute and a half for Trent to answer.
Oh, well, I would say first, when it comes to other Eastern authors, those around the Great Schism or those afterwards, that sometimes we can find that theological views can be rehabilitated. There have even been many great doctors and theologians in the church where there was a time their views were considered heretical, but then there's been development and a better understanding of how their views can be placed in models of theology as a whole. And I think the same could be applied to St. Gregory of Palamas. The other question about the Filioque, the Eastern Catholic churches do not deny Filioque dogmatically, but this is an accommodation that, to understand for Eastern churches, the church recognizes that there are other churches, other Catholic churches with their distinct patrimony, liturgical heritage, customs. And so the church allows that, they're in union with the Pope, to celebrate their unique cultural, liturgical, and theological heritage, as long as it's in union with the universal faith. So they affirm Filioque, but they might recite the creed in its more ancient form, because the Filioque, the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son, Filioque. That part was not originally in the Nicene Constantinopolitan Creed. It was added later by a group of Spanish bishops. So it's just an accommodation that the Eastern parishes, Eastern churches use the older version of the same creed. So it's accommodation. It is not denial of important theological truths. And so I think that sometimes some Orthodox don't see that.
I got to leave it there and say thank you very much, Jack, for the call. Trent, thank you very much for the hour. We did keep you working. Now go on to your next. You have another interview coming up, right?
I do have another one after this. Excited for that.
Well, go do more
work.
work.
With Coptic Orthodox, by the way. We'll be talking about stuff we agree on.
Oh, that's very cool. That's very cool.
Yeah.
So look for that. Trent in dialogue with Coptic Orthodox Christians. We have to take this break. Jimmy Akin will be back for the second hour. If you're on the line, stay on the line. If you haven't dialed yet, you can. 888-318-7884. Ask Me Anything with Jimmy Akin coming up right after this on Catholic Answers Live. Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. As promised, Jimmy Akin here with us this hour. And it's Ask Me Anything. All the lines currently full. As they open up, you can get through at 888-318-7884 and ask Jimmy whatever you would like to ask him. Jimmy Akin, of course, senior apologist here at Catholic Answers and the proprietor of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. Hello, Jimmy Akin.
Hello, Cy Kellett. How you doing?
I am doing pretty well today. I think we have 2 hours more with you tomorrow, so thank you for being with us on a Thursday to help out. It'll be now.
Yeah, no problem. Tomorrow's Weird Questions, and it's pre-recorded, so we already got that one in the can.
Yeah. And they are weird, so join us for that tomorrow. Today, we're here. You can call 888-318-7884 if you've got a question for Jimmy. What's in the Mysterious World lineup this week, Jimmy?
Well, every quarter on Mysterious World, we do a patrons question show. So we asked our patrons what questions they had, and we'll be answering them tomorrow.
All right, but look forward to that. Is that it when you have an extra Friday in the month, or is it just...
No, that's Fifth Friday Weird
Questions. Oh, yeah, right. Okay. All right, well, we'll start in Georgia. All the lines are full, Jimmy, so I'm going to make you work right now.
Okay.
Well, I think that's what you're here for, but Will's in Georgia.
Well, we could just banter for an hour.
I could, but I don't think anyone would enjoy it. All right, Will, I've said your name, so I will push the button. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy. No, Will?
Hello.
Oh, hi, Will.
Do you hear me?
Barely. Give it a try.
Will, you need to speak directly into the phone and not use speaker.
Can you hear me?
Okay, Will,
That's
go ahead
much
with your
better.
question.
First off, great staff. They're
that's
amazing to me. But
thank you.
I was wondering. I feel like some of the controversies in the early church, such as the dating of Easter, they can seem trivial today, and I wanted to know why it seems that way. Because if I'm not mistaken, like the Pope was excommunicating other people because they had a different date for Easter. And why does it seem trivial today?
Yeah, well, so this is a controversy in the 2nd century where Pope Victor threatened to excommunicate some churches over the date of Easter. I don't think he actually did that, though, but he certainly threatened to. In terms of this particular controversy, so, Jesus was crucified in conjunction with Passover, which occurs on the 14th of the month of Nisan on the Jewish calendar. And so you could base the date of Easter on that, the 14th day of the month of Nisan. And there were some churches that did base their date for Easter on that, and they were called Quartodecimians, because Quartodecimian, based on its Latin roots, means 14th. So these were the 14thers. And that would make Easter a holiday like Christmas that's always tied to a particular day on the calendar. Like Christmas is always December 25th. Doesn't matter what day of the week it is, it's always December 25th. But other churches would celebrate Easter, since Christ rose on a Sunday, they would celebrate Easter on the Sunday that fell in the right place. I won't go into all the calculations, but that fell in the right place. And so you had a division between churches, and to us, yeah, it doesn't seem that big of a deal, but it did seem like a big deal to Victor and to the churches that he was threatening to excommunicate. They both held fast to their positions, and eventually the church father and doctor of the church, Saint Irenaeus of Lyon, urged Victor to back off and not really carry through on this. And they were able eventually to patch it up at the First Council of Nicaea in AD 325, which established a unified date. The Sundaists, rather than the 14thers, won that fight. And so that's why we celebrate Easter on Sundays today. You may know that in some churches, particularly, for example, in Eastern Orthodoxy, they don't always celebrate it on the same Sunday that Western Christians do, and that's because of a different issue. At the time, they were using the Julian calendar, but the Julian calendar got out of sync with the seasons, and so Pope Gregory the 13th, 15th? One of the Pope Gregory's fixed it to where it would stay in sync with the calendar, but that meant making an adjustment. And so there is currently a division of practice between those churches that use the Julian calendar for liturgical purposes and those that use the Gregorian calendar for liturgical purposes, although fortunately there are efforts to fix even that situation today. You know, the churches are making bigger efforts to get along together and have a common celebration of Easter as a testament to Christian unity. And the Second Vatican Council was even willing to, you know, not just to modify its date, but if I recall correctly, to even go to a fixed date, or at least a fixed way of calculating the date, so that we could all have a common date of celebration. So that prioritizes Christian unity and the display of Christian unity to the watching world over other considerations. But to get to the root issue of why do some of these controversies seem trivial to us, it's because of a couple of factors. One, the liturgy is primetime Christianity. And anytime you introduce changes into primetime Christianity, people's noses get out of joint. And this is true all over the world. Like when the Mass was put into the vernacular, that got a bunch of people's noses out of joint. When permission was given for a greater celebration of the Latin liturgy, that got a bunch of people's noses out of joint. It also put other people's noses in joint. Then when there were more restrictions on the celebration of the Latin liturgy, noses go out of joint again. Currently, over in India, there is a major, huge controversy in one of the Eastern rites of the Catholic Church, where the question is, does the priest face the congregation for the entirety of Mass, or is he supposed to turn around at certain points? And they worked out a compromise, but still people's noses get out of joint. So anytime you've got a difference in how we're doing the liturgy, there is the potential for this. And that potential is exacerbated by tribalism, because groups define themselves by their practices and their beliefs and so forth. So anytime you have a group that is similar, now if you've got a group that's totally different, you know, than us, it's whoever us happens to be, it's not much of a threat. You know, like I really don't care how Hindus do their liturgy. But if someone's claiming to be a fellow Catholic and they're doing liturgy in a different way, that's a more serious issue because they're closer to us. And so that could make the difference a bigger threat than a difference that occurs totally outside of our community. And so what happens is different tribes within any given group tend to focus on the smaller issues and make a bigger deal out of them. And so in the 2nd century, you had this difference between different groups of Christians. Christianity was a persecuted minority at this time, and so people took this small difference really seriously. And that's what tends to happen under the influence of original sin when tribalism gets involved. The different tribes will magnify the importance of very small differences as a way of drawing lines between themselves. And so between the two facts that liturgy is, you know, primetime Catholicism, and that different tribes will magnify the importance of relatively minor differences when they differ with each other, that tends to explain why this took on the magnitude it did. But now that we're so much later and passions have cooled, it seems much less significant to us now than it did then.
I'm going to leave it there. Perfect time for a break. Thank you very much for the call. Right back with more Ask Me Anything with Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
Let us help you with your question today on Catholic Answers Live.
Do you have a question but prefer to ask it privately? Catholic Questions can help. Go to CatholicQuestions.com to ask your question online, email us, drop us a letter, or give us a call. Longtime Catholic Answers Live apologist and author Jim Blackburn or another Catholic Questions apologist will be happy to assist you. Catholic Questions proudly supports Catholic Answers Live, so visit us at CatholicQuestions.com today. That's CatholicQuestions.com.
Another great podcast on EWTN Podcast Central is Two Become Family. Renzo and Monica know marriage isn't easy. They try to bring the wisdom of Catholicism into everyday situations and conversations about marriage and family life. You can hear this and other faith-filled podcasts from our friends and affiliates around the world at EWTN Podcast Central. Visit EWTN.com/radio and click on Podcast Central today.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Right now, you can visit shop.catholic.com and check out one of the biggest and best collections of Catholic books, online courses, ebooks, MP3s, and more. It's Black Friday, Cyber Monday. Those are over, but our great store-wide sale prices are not over. Check it all out right now at shop.catholic.com, and I think you still got time to get it shipped before Christmas. It'll let you know on the site whether it does. Shop.catholic.com. Jimmy Akin is our guest. 1.3 million people are on the phone lines, so back we go to the phones.
Oh, that's more than the maximum estimate of the number of people killed in Stalin's Great Purge from 1936 to 1938.
That's why I went with that number. I'm just kidding.
Is the maximum estimate is 1.2 million for that.
Well, I never wanted to say this, but you beat Stalin. Congratulations, Jimmy. Miles in Idaho, listening on the Catholic Answers Live app. Go ahead with your question.
Hi, Jimmy.
Howdy.
Hi, Jimmy. Hey.
Howdy.
Okay, so I originally was thinking, hi. So I was originally thinking that this was about the Immaculate Conception, my question, but I actually think it's more about the Annunciation.
Okay.
So I was wondering, there's a lot of talk when it comes to Gabriel awaiting Mary's fiat, her yes.
Mm-hmm.
But so then it makes me think, did she really have free will in saying yes? Because God made her immaculate, so she was free from sin. So there was only one person that was sinless. But then if she said no, then there would just be a sinless woman running around. And would God have to have waited for another virgin? Or, how would that... I'm trying to wrap my head around that.
Yeah, well, this is certainly something that folks have wondered about. What the church teaches is that Mary had free will. And you will find language used, for example, by Pope Benedict, talking about how Gabriel or the world even waits to hear her answer. Is it going to be yes or no? Will she agree to become the mother of our Lord? And so there are questions that arise around that. And frankly, we don't have the answers to these questions. We can wonder about them, but we don't have solid answers. I'll give at least a couple of examples. One of them is, did she have the ability to say no? Now, we're told she's got free will, so that would indicate the ability to say no, but would it have been sinful if she had said no? The answer to that is going to depend on a question that's currently open in Catholic theology, which is, was Mary impeccable? Now, the church teaches that Mary never sinned, but it's considered an open question among Orthodox Catholic theologians of, was she impeccable or unable to sin? And you'll have theologians on both sides of that. Some theologians will say, well, she had the same freedom that Adam and Eve did in their unfallen state. They had the freedom either to sin or not to sin. And so by being rendered immaculate from her conception forward, Mary didn't have original sin, but she had the same freedom to either sin or not sin that Adam and Eve did. It's just she never sinned. She made better choices than they did. On the other hand, you'll have others who say, no, she was given a special gift of impeccability. Peccatum is Latin for sin, and so if you're impeccable, that means you're unable to sin. Now, we know that Jesus was unable to sin because he's all holy God. So his intrinsic holiness settles that question. But when it comes to Mary, she's not God. And so there's a question of, did the graces she receive include impeccability or did they not? Either way, she never committed a sin. But if they did include impeccability and she had the ability to say no, then we would have to conclude that saying no would not have been sinful. On the other hand, if she did not have impeccability, then saying no might be sinful. So that's one question we just have to wonder about. The church doesn't have a teaching on was she impeccable or not. Then there are questions of, suppose she had said no, what would have happened? And the answer is, we're not told. We don't know. One possibility is God, and I think you alluded to this, God might have waited for another woman. He might have prepared another woman to become the mother of the Messiah and then given her the option. Another possibility is God might have called off the redemption altogether and we might not have been redeemed. Another option is God might have worked out some other way for us to be redeemed besides the death of his son. So there are any number of possibilities that either involve the whole project of redemption being stopped or the whole project of redemption being reconfigured and adjusted in some way. But God hasn't told us the answer, and so the truth is we don't know. We just have to live with that uncertainty.
And thank you very much.
I will mention that because of his omniscience, God knew she was going to say yes. So it's not like that was in doubt from God's perspective.
Miles, thank you. Thanks very much for the question. Going to go down to Texas. Hunter is in Texas, listening on the Catholic Answers Live app. Hunter, go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hi there, Jimmy. My question for you is, I've read that a great many archaeologists conclude that certain of the events of the Book of Joshua, like the conquest of Jericho or Ai, don't line up with the archaeological record and therefore didn't happen. And I want to know, what are we to make of this? Does biblical inerrancy and consequently the truth of our faith depend on these events having happened historically? And what are the consequences if these archaeologists are right and these events didn't happen?
Okay, the first thing I'd say is that it is not clear that people who make these proposals are correct. For one reason, some of the sites that are named in Joshua are not 100% certain. There have been certain locations that have been traditionally identified as, okay, this ruin is that site from Joshua. But writing was so uncommon at the time that it's not like we have literary records telling us the name of this ruin back then. And so there have been proposals that not all of the sites have been accurately identified, and so claims based on inaccurate identifications are themselves going to be problematic. Then there's the fact that in Joshua, sometimes it's interpreted in such a way as to imply things that are not guaranteed by the Hebrew text. Like if, for example, if let's suppose Joshua said this site was, smashed, and then I'm making up an example deliberately, but let's say the Hebrew text implies the site was smashed, and then modern archaeologists say, oh, that means totally destroyed. Well, no, it doesn't necessarily mean that. And so there have been issues of is the text of Joshua being read accurately? Then there's the whole issue of dating, because in order to establish whether the events of Joshua happened in the manner described, you have to be able to date archaeologically when they happened. And there are questions about, is the dating system that we're using for these ruins accurate or not? So there are multiple reasons to question those assessments. I would point you to a couple of resources that could be beneficial to get an alternative perspective on that. One of them is the book On the Reliability of the Old Testament by the author Kenneth Kitchen, spelled just like the place you make your food. Kenneth Kitchen, On the Reliability of the Old Testament. Another is a YouTube channel by an Egyptologist named David Falk, Falk, called Ancient Egypt and the Bible. And he goes into this question. He not only talks about Egypt, he talks about biblical history, and he goes into the interpretation and accuracy of Joshua a good bit. So having said all that, I'm going to put that aside and now address your main question. Does our faith depend on these claims being accurate in a literal historical sense? And the answer is no. Neither does biblical inerrancy. According to the Second Vatican Council, the biblical texts are accurate to the extent they assert something in the proper sense. And what that means is, in essence, you have to read them as they're written. You have to understand what the author is trying to assert. Like if I said to Cy Kellett, oh, I came home yesterday and I had so much mail came while I was gone. I had 1 million pieces of mail when I got back from my trip. Well, okay, that's not literally true. I didn't have 1 million pieces of mail. 1 million pieces of mail would not fit inside my mailbox. But I'm using exaggeration to make a point. And it's a form of exaggeration known as hyperbole. I just mean I had a lot. And so if you take what I say the way it was meant, what I was actually asserting is different than what the words themselves would suggest. And one of the things you find out when you read ancient documents is they're like us. They use hyperbole. They use exaggeration to make points all the time. And so they will say, and they do this especially when it comes to battles. They're kind of like, in the ancient world, they're kind of like professional wrestlers trash talking each other. It's like, we totally destroyed them. And it's not meant literally any more than, the Fabulous Freebirds meant, we totally destroyed the Wrecking Crew. Well, they didn't literally kill them all. They're just using exaggeration. And that's a very common feature of ancient speech in the ancient Near East when it comes to battles. The Hittites did that. The Egyptians did that. The Israelites did that. Everybody did that. And so you have to take that into account when you're reading Joshua. They're going to be using hyperbole when they talk about battle situations. The text is not trying to assert these things literally. Also, you have to recognize the kind of text this is. It's written not immediately at the time of the invasion. It's written several centuries thereafter. And it's being written in a time before Israel had a king, which meant that it is being written before they had court recorders. When you get up to the time of Saul and David and Solomon, it's clear they have people who are keeping exact records. And as you read through Kings and Chronicles and Samuel and so forth, it'll refer to those chronicles. It'll say, and if you want to know more about this, go read the Wars of the Lord, or go read the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel, or whatever, referring to lost works that we no longer have. But it's clear they had people keeping records at that stage. They didn't have that in Joshua's day. And that means Joshua is based on memory. And whenever you have oral tradition, there is a significant amount of reconstruction that happened that is part of the text. And so you also, in addition to having to take into account hyperbole, you have to take into account that the author is using reconstruction based on oral tradition. I recently did an episode of the Jimmy Akin podcast about this in the Gospels. It's called Reconstructed Dialogue in the Gospels. And so I explained the basic principles that apply to biblically reconstructed events there, but it applies even more because the Gospels were written, very shortly after Jesus's ministry. Joshua was written significantly after, and in a period where there were no court recorders. So it's based on reconstruction of narrative based on oral tradition. And so there's going to be an even greater degree of reconstruction in Joshua. And that means that you don't take the small details as this is exactly literally true. The authors are not claiming that, and it misreads the text to try to get that degree of precision out of them. So no, this doesn't threaten biblical inerrancy or our faith.
And that brings us to the break. As you can hear, Jimmy Akin is our guest. It's Ask Me Anything. 888-31-TRUTH is the number. We'll be right back with more questions for Jimmy after this on Catholic Answers Live. When the resurrected Jesus appeared to disciples on the road to Emmaus, they didn't recognize him until the breaking of the bread. The same is true today. In the Holy Eucharist, we really meet Jesus. In The Eucharist is Really Jesus, author Joe Heschmeyer explains how knowing Jesus in the Eucharist is the key to understanding all of Christian faith. Order your copy of The Eucharist is Really Jesus today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore.
Our Lord needs articulate defenders of the truth to spread the joy of the Catholic faith. Catholic Answers monthly giving club, Society 315, helps you fulfill the call in 1 Peter 3:15 to always be prepared to make a defense for the hope that is in you. For as little as $10 a month, you'll help Catholics grow in faith, bring lapsed Catholics home, and lead non-Catholics to the truth. Go to casociety315.com and join today.
We hope that one of the things that we communicate here at Catholic Answers Live is that our Catholic faith allows us to be fully serious about all the problems we encounter in the church and in the world, but it also lets us have light hearts and maybe even mix in a bit of fun, and that is exactly what our good friend Joe Heschmeyer does in his popular podcast, Shameless Popery. You should check it out at shamelessjoe.com. Joe's got a deep grasp of the faith, morals, the teachings of the church, all that, but he's also got a witty conversational style. He entertains and he informs, but you will leave equipped to better answer the most common challenges, misconceptions, and questions about the Catholic faith. He's got insightful guests, he does on-air debates, and he takes a close look into all the things that you want to know about as a Catholic living today. You'll walk away knowledgeable and filled with joy. Look for Joe on his YouTube channel. Check him out at shamelessjoe.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, become a patron. Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin, our guest, and I mentioned Jimmy Akin's podcast, Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, one of the most popular documentary podcasts out there. But I failed to mention that Jimmy has a much newer podcast called the Jimmy Akin Podcast. And you can find that by typing Jimmy Akin Podcast into your machine and letting the machine find it for you. Certainly one place you can find it is on YouTube, where Jimmy has lots and lots of material. And that comes out Tuesdays, Jimmy?
Mondays.
Oh, Mondays. Okay, Mondays.
Monday is the Jimmy Akin Podcast. Friday is Mysterious World.
And what do we get on the Jimmy Akin Podcast this week?
The one that came out this last Monday was on the question, is everything predestined? Because there are people, especially in the Calvinist community, who want to say that God absolutely himself determines everything that's going to happen in world history, not only people's choices, but the motion of every little grain of dust. God picks it all to happen by himself without looking at what people are going to do. He just picks it all. And so if that's true, especially if you're a Calvinist and you believe in sola scriptura, you're going to need to prove it by scripture alone. So I look at the verses that are commonly cited in major Calvinist confessions of faith in an attempt to prove this, and I go through them and evaluate whether they really do or don't prove what Calvinists are hoping they do.
All right, check it out on the Jimmy Akin Podcast. At least 2 mysteries a week, one on Monday, one on Friday now from Jimmy Akin, plus all the other podcasts. Michael's in Buffalo, New York, watching on YouTube. Michael, welcome. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hello, Jimmy. Thank you for taking my call. I'm a catechist here in Buffalo, and I have quite a few Protestants in class this year, and when we were going through the Marian dogmas, they seem to have a lot of difficulty with the Assumption. And some of the questions they asked were, is this really what was believed for nearly 2,000 years? And why, at that time, and I believe it was 1950, did the Pope finally make that a dogma? Like, what was the circumstances that at that time this needed to be a dogma? And I was hoping you could help me with that.
Okay. So in terms of has it always been believed, the answer is yes, but that doesn't mean that we have records of it that go all the way back to the first century, because the amount of Christian literature from the earliest centuries is very small. Most of it has been lost, and there weren't that many Christians around to begin anyway, so they weren't, and most of them were illiterate, so they weren't cranking out lots of literature for the first few centuries. But once we start to get a lot of Christian literature being made, in the 300s and 400s and so forth, we do have records of the Assumption. And it's even been proposed, and I wouldn't oversell this, but it's been proposed that it's even mentioned in the book of Revelation, where you see in chapter 12, John sees the figure of a woman who gives birth to Christ in heaven in chapter 12. And well, she's given birth to Christ, so at least part of what she represents is the Virgin Mary. That's not all of what she represents, but that's part of it. And she's in heaven. So maybe this contains an allusion to the Assumption. On the other hand, maybe it doesn't, because Revelation was written quite early. In my view, it was written about the year AD 68. And so, or 60, end of 68. And so Mary may have still been on earth at that point. She may not yet have ascended. So I can't point to that one with certainty. But certainly once we get the bulk of Christian literature starting to develop that has survived, we do have references to this. In terms of why 1950, well, I can answer that on two levels. One is an ecclesiastical level, and one is on a practical level. On an ecclesiastical level, well, Pius XII, was interested in doing this, and so he polled the world's bishops and asked their opinions. If I recall correctly, he also polled theologians before he polled the bishops, but they came back saying, yeah, this is a good time to do this, and so he ended up doing it. So you had a general consensus of church leaders that it was an opportune time to define this. So that's the ecclesiastical level on which I can answer it. There's also a more speculative practical level. Psychelet, the Assumption of Mary was defined in 1950. What happened 5 years before 1950?
1945, with the end of the Second World War?
End of the Second World War. Second question, how did the Second World War affect conditions in Europe?
Holy smokes, that place was flattened.
Yeah. So Europe had just gone through this major convulsion that destroyed all kinds of stuff, just left and right. I mean, cities were bombed, they were firebombed, millions of people had died, including the victims of the German Holocaust. There had been multiple countries had been devastated by totalitarianism and the need to fight totalitarianism. So Europe was a wreck, and they were in a rebuilding phase. And given all of the trauma that Europe had just been through, I've seen it proposed that that's why a decision was made to define this very hopeful doctrine at that time, because it shows us this is not just what happened to Mary. This is what happens to all of us. We will all one day be assumed to be with Christ. That's explicitly stated in 1 Thessalonians 4:17. And as on so many other issues, God used Mary as a sign of Christian destiny, that her ultimate destiny, like our ultimate destiny, is to be united with Christ in glory. And so after this horrific convulsion of World War II, it could make sense to sound a note of hope and say, no matter what horrors of war we've experienced here on earth, our ultimate destiny is to be with Christ in glory. And Mary is a sign of that, because God gave Mary the gifts that he'll ultimately give to all Christians. He just gave them to her early as a way of making her a sign for us of what will happen to us. So our ultimate destiny is not death and destruction and war. It's being united with Christ our Savior in glory.
You know what? I'm going to just leave that there and hope that that was helpful to you, because lots of folks still on the lines, and we can get another question in before we have to take a break. Zach is in Iowa, watching on YouTube. Zach, thank you for waiting. Go ahead with your question.
Hey guys, slightly better way to ask my question is I don't quite know how to properly internalize revelations or epiphanies I have during praying without like stopping and writing stuff down. Otherwise, like actually just earlier today I was doing the rosary, and by the time I finished, that small epiphany was gone. That I feel like I shouldn't be just relying on writing it down. It should be more internalizing it, since it's from God or something. Anyway.
All right. So you want some tips on what to do with that from Jimmy?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm not sure exactly what kind of epiphanies you have, and I can't vouch for them coming from God. They may be coming from your own thoughts, and maybe God is guiding your thoughts. On the other hand, maybe you're just figuring these things out for yourself. So I'm not exactly sure, but in terms of memory aids, well, I don't tend to have a lot of epiphanies when I'm praying, but I do have things that I want to remember when it's not convenient for me to write them down. For example, let's suppose I'm laying down for a nap and I'm laying in bed, and all of a sudden I remember something I need to do when I get back to my work computer. Well, I'll try to create a visual reminder. Now, I have this isn't going to work for everybody. Some people have a condition known as aphantasia, where they don't generate mental images. They can't voluntarily generate mental images. So like if you tell someone, picture yourself in a field, they can't literally do that. They think that's some kind of metaphor. Zach, do you happen to know, do you have aphantasia, or can you generate mental images?
Do you know?
I would say mental images. Sorry,
Okay.
I got a little lost
Like
in pondering how I could have worded this differently.
If I said, imagine you're in a field, could you imagine a field around you?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So that's a sign you don't have aphantasia. There's a spectrum here, and I have to caution this a little bit because I'm at the other end of the spectrum. I don't have aphantasia. I have what's called hyperphantasia, where I can generate almost any image around me very vividly. It's like I have a mental holodeck that surrounds me. But if you've got the ability to generate mental images, then one of the common ways of trying to remember stuff is by generating a mental image that corresponds to it. So, for example, if I'm laying down for a nap and I remember, I need to call Della or I need to email Della when I get back to my work computer, I will imagine my work computer with the giant word Della on the screen. Or not that I know anyone named Della, but this is what I do. Or at least I'll imagine a gigantic D on the screen. And then when I come back to my computer, there's a greater likelihood I'll remember the mental image I set, and that'll remind me to email Della. So one way that you can try to remember things without stopping to write them down is try to come up with a mental image that you can use. And frankly, the sillier the mental image is, the better. For example, the Greek word for face is prosopon. And one way to remember that is you imagine a person with a bottle of soap and they're pouring soap on their face. So prosopon is the word for face in Greek. And that's a silly image, but the thing is, silly images are easier to remember. So I would suggest trying to come up with mental images and trying to make them as bizarre as possible. That would work. Also, you could boil it down to a phrase that you could repeat to yourself several times, although you're going to have to at least stop the prayer in order to repeat the mental phrase several times. But those are a couple of ways of employing your existing sense faculties, both visual and auditory, to try to remember it. And you can try those and see if they work. If they don't work, though, or they're not giving you the results you want, I just say stop praying and write it down. Take a little quick note on your phone or have on a piece of paper with a pencil or whatever. God is not going to mind. God is okay. If you have something, if you have an insight, you think it's important to remember for later, God is going to be okay with it if you pause for a moment to record it for later. So that would be my advice.
I'm going to leave that there. I hope that was helpful to you. We have to take a break. We'll be right back with more. We'll look forward to talking with you again sometime. Zach, more Jimmy Akin coming up right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
Hang on. Catholic Answers Live will return in a moment.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
One of the biggest mistakes a Christian can make is to try to do good without God's help. St. Therese said, when we trust only ourselves and not God, our soul becomes incapable of virtue. Her remedy? Works of charity. And the greatest work of charity is to share the gospel. At St. Paul Street Evangelization, a Catholic nonprofit, we encourage you to share the gospel with someone who doesn't know Jesus. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization, streetevangelization.com.
Proclaiming the faith, changing lives.
The year was 1996. EWTN acquires a Catholic Resource Network, a Catholic online service with the largest collection of Catholic documents on the web to expand EWTN's media apostolate.
To learn more about Mother Angelica's life and the history of EWTN, visit EWTN.com/Mother Angelica.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin is our guest this hour, and as you would expect, all the lines have stayed full throughout the hour, so back we go to the phones. Thomas is in Nashville, Tennessee, listening on iHeartRadio. We're glad you're here, Thomas. Go ahead with your question.
Hey, good to be here. Thank you for taking my call. I wanted to ask you, Jimmy, about my dad. My dad passed on November 1st. He was he had basal cell carcinoma, and a couple of things.
So sorry to hear that.
Family, we prayed for years for him. Hey, thank you. We prayed for years for him to receive the sacraments. He never got the Eucharist. He didn't get confession but we did have a priest came and he got anointed with holy oil. He had the apostolic pardon literally hours before he passed. And I would like to know more about that. And also like the suffering. He suffered for about 2+ years. I mean, physically the cancer eating away in his face. I know he went through depression, anxiety, fear, anger, and how that redemptive suffering may have been, purgative for his soul and the betterment of his soul. It was really hard to watch, but seeing it now makes a little more sense. And I just really want to know, he's okay. And it was God showing his, love, mercy, and compassion for my dad.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, there are a few things I can say here. The first one is I want to encourage the listeners to pray for your father and for you and your family and for everyone in similar situations, because I know the pain of losing parents. I've lost both of mine. And in fact, with my father, I was able, even though he wasn't Catholic, but I was able to get him the last rites, meaning anointing of the sick and apostolic pardon. I was able to get those for him because I was able to get his, consent to receive them. In fact, I served as the side table to hold the cruets while the priest administered the anointing. So I've been in this situation. In terms of the last rites, they can involve up to 4 different things. One of them is reception of the Holy Eucharist, which in this context is called viaticum. Viaticum is Latin. It means basically go with me. It's where you're about to depart on your final journey from this life, and you take Jesus with you on this journey in the form of the sacrament. It also can involve confession if the person is in a state where they're able to confess. And it definitely involves the anointing of the sick, which has a number of effects. It may help with physical healing. God could miraculously physically heal someone through the sacrament. Even if that doesn't happen, though, it will give the person grace to help strengthen them through their passing. And if they haven't had the opportunity to confess for whatever reason, then it will result in their being forgiven their sins. And on that ground alone, your dad received the anointing of the sick. The anointing of the sick forgives sins. I would be very, confident and optimistic of your dad's salvation. I would assume he's okay and that his suffering is over now. When it comes to the apostolic pardon, this is essentially a plenary indulgence. And so it's an effort by the church to ease his transition from this life into heaven, if possible, without any of the process of purgatory. It may or may not have that effect depending on the situation, but one way or another, your dad's going to heaven, and the church is doing all it can to try to smooth that transition. When it comes to the redemptive aspect of your father's suffering, all suffering is redemptive. There is no such thing as non-redemptive suffering. According to the Catechism of the Catholic Church, God would not permit any evil, whether it's a moral evil or a physical evil like suffering. God would not permit any evil to exist if he were not going to bring about an equal or greater good as a result of that suffering. The most obvious example of redemptive suffering is, of course, the crucifixion itself, where Christ suffered on the cross and God brought about the redemption of the world. But the same thing is true of all of our suffering, whether it's physical pain or depression or anything else. Anything we suffer, God is going to bring about an equal or greater good. Now, we may or may not be able to figure out what that good is in this life. Sometimes we may, sometimes, a lot of the time we may not, because we don't have a comprehensive perspective. Our knowledge is too limited. But we can still trust that one way or another, God is going to use this suffering to bring about redemption. And so you're in the case of your father's suffering, it may bring about redemption directly to him, again, by easing his transition into heaven. Maybe he suffered for things on this earth in such a way that he won't need to in the afterlife. Or maybe he'll bring about redemption in some form for you or other members of your family or other people your father knew or for someone else in the world. It's hard to know, because of our very limited perspective, exactly what form the redemption will take, but we can be very confident that all suffering is redemptive. And so whatever your father went through will have positive effects either for him or for others or for him and others.
I'm going to, again, leave that there. And Thomas, thank you very much for the call. And I'm sure there are many people praying for your father. I'm going to try to get as many on as I can with Jimmy, however. And so off to Atlanta, Georgia we go, where Adam is listening on the Catholic Answers Live app. Adam, go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Thank you for having me on. My wife and I are catechumens. Well, we're almost catechumens.
Oh.
We'll be this weekend. So
congratulations.
We're very excited to join. Thank you. We're very excited to join the Catholic faith. But I have a question that's been kind of bothering me, and it's about when church teachings are actually infallible and unchanging. And I was reading about Pope St. John Paul's letter in 1994 where he said there will never be female priests, but it seems like there's still some pressure for that to happen. And I guess I have the same question for contraceptives and female priests and the church's teachings on homosexuality and whether those are in fact unchanging and infallible, and how that works within the church.
Okay, well, Adam, you're in luck because I happen to write a whole book about the magisterium and how it works, and it's called Teaching with Authority. And since you're in Atlanta, you're here in the continental United States, so we can send you one.
Sure.
So once we get done with your question, hang on the line. We'll get your address, and we'll send you a copy of Teaching with Authority. In terms of how to know when something is infallible, there are three ways that something can be taught infallibly. One is by the Pope, one is by an ecumenical council, and one is by the bishops of the church, even when they're not in an ecumenical council. And that last one is called the ordinary and universal magisterium of the church, which is a big fancy term, but it's what it's called. There are different criteria for identifying when infallibility has been engaged. And there isn't a single divine mandate for it must be done this way, but there are certain ways that it's customary to be done. And this, I'm going to have to simplify this. I go into this in a lot more detail in the book in a way that's not simplistic. But if you see a pope using the word define, like I define this, that's the Pope declaring something infallible. If you see an ecumenical council using the term anathema, and they're using it with respect to a doctrine of faith or morals, that's a sign, as opposed to something else, because they do use it for other things, that's a sign that they're triggering infallibility. And if in one way or another, the bishops of the world teaching in union with the Pope teach that a matter is to be held definitively, not just held, but held definitively, then they have taught that matter infallibly. And it's really hard to establish that the bishops of the world have taught that something is to be held definitively, because if they're not in a council, they haven't voted. That's one of the reasons we have councils in the first place, is to make the minds of the bishops clear, where they all get together and vote on stuff. But we are fortunate in that in recent years, there have been some confirmations by the Vatican of matter, and by John Paul II, of certain matters that have been taught infallibly by the ordinary and universal magisterium. And the issue of women priests is one of those. In his motu proprio, that's a kind of document, Ordinatio Sacerdotalis, John Paul II said that this is to be held definitively, and the then Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, which is one of the departments at Rome, clarified that what he meant is that this has already been settled by the ordinary and universal magisterium, meaning by the bishops, even though they weren't in an ecumenical council. And he similarly settled several, referred to the ordinary magisterium settling several other matters in Evangelium Vitae. But stay on the line and we'll get you a copy of Teaching with Authority.
Please do stay on the line. Thanks to everybody who called. Just 2 callers remained. We'll have to get to you another day, but thank you for the calls. That was pretty hard work, Jimmy. Thanks for doing that hour with us.
No problem. My pleasure.
Tomorrow we got Jimmy again for weird questions. So join us. I already know. A lot of the questions are really, really weird. Plus, we got that cool weird questions music that'll play tomorrow. So that'll do it for us here. We'll see you again very soon, God willing, right here on Catholic Answers Live.